God is bringing my attention to India and Israel and their ever growing alliance. So we're going to read about this because there are a lot of narratives going around that the United States and India are great allies, the United States and Israel are best friends. Until they're not, I mean, everybody needs to wake up. Look at the way that Israelis are speaking about America. This attitude is pervasive in Israel that America is just outright stupid and can be moved like a chess piece wherever you want to put it. And the reason for this is because of false interpretation of Scripture by Christian Zionists. So the alliance that I already did a video on that with regard to Israel, but here I want to do a video on India because there is an ever-growing alliance between India and Israel, and they have shared agenda. They have mutual agenda, and it seems to be moving forward. And this is something that God's been talking to me about. And to be quite frank, I don't know much about India. I'm starting to know more because of something that he spoke to me a few days ago, or sometime last week, with regard to India batting eyes at Israel. So as I started to investigate, what does this mean? Why are you speaking this to me right now with regard to, at the same time that you're talking to me about America falling to this image of the Antichrist that is counterfeit Israel? Why are you talking to me about this right now? Now, I don't have all the pieces, but I'm going to tell you right now that there is a rule that I go by. You discern with God. What does that mean? Does it mean that you take the pieces that God has given you and then you put together a puzzle? No. It means that when you discern with God, what should be coming out of your mouth is, this is what God showed me. If he didn't show it to you, then you let all those pieces just stay where they are until he puts it together for you. That is the difference between being moved by the Spirit of God and moved by your own carnality. Nothing should come out of your mouth that you put together. So all we're doing right now is educating ourselves on what is it that's going on, because these are the things that God has spoken to me. This article is coming from time.com, and the title is, India is not a U.S. ally and has never wanted to be. With Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi slated for a June 22nd state visit to Washington, India will, if briefly, be front page news in the United States. Since President Clinton ended a chill in U.S.-India relations almost 25 years ago, successive American and Indian administrations across political parties have worked to strengthen ties. So it's fair to ask, how robust is this relationship today? As with the blind men and the elephant, the answer varies. Is India a bad bet, or is it, as the White House senior Asia policy official said recently, the most important bilateral relationship with the United States on the global stage? I mean, that's so funny. It's just so sad. It's kind of like, the guy who proposes to his girlfriend and they've never had a conversation about getting married, and she's like, what are you doing? Like, do we just make these decisions on our own? So-and-so's my BFF. And the other person's like, no, I'm not. So-and-so's my BFF. I hardly even know you. Despite careful nurturing by Washington over the years, many aspects of U.S. ties with India remain challenging. Bilateral trade has grown tenfold since 2000 to $191 billion in 2022, and India became the 9th largest U.S. trading partner in 2021. But long-standing economic gripes persist, meriting 13 pages in the 2023 Foreign Trade Barriers Report from the U.S. Trade Representative. Multilaterally, India's role in the fast consolidating Quad consultation, comprised of the United States, Australia, India, and Japan, has brought shared purpose to Washington and New Delhi, both of which harbor concerns about China. But New Delhi also champions alternative non-Western groupings like the BRICS. And it remains outside bodies central to U.S. diplomacy like the UN Security Council and the G7. Today, U.S.-India cooperation spans defense, global health, sustainable development, climate and technology, among other things. But deep differences remain, including concerns in Washington about India's democratic backsliding under Modi and India's failure to condemn the Russian invasion of Ukraine. In other words, the U.S.-India relationship has been transformed over the past quarter century, but that transformation has not delivered a partnership or alignment similar to the closest U.S. alliances. This shouldn't surprise anyone. India is not a U.S. ally and has not wanted to become one. To see relations with rising power India as on a pathway that culminates in a relationship like that the United States enjoys with Japan or the United Kingdom creates expectations that will not be met. Indian leaders across parties and over decades have long prioritized foreign policy independence as a central feature of India's approach to the world. That remains the case even with Modi's openness to the United States. For India's first Prime Minister, I'm not going to be able to say this, Jawaharlal Nehru, protecting his country's hard-fought independence was a guiding principle for foreign policy. Speaking in the Indian Parliament in March 1951, Nehru noted that by aligning ourselves with any one power, you surrender your opinion. Give up the policy you would normally pursue because somebody else wants you to pursue another policy. 12 years later, evaluating his country's non-alignment policy in the pages of Foreign Affairs, Nehru went on to observe that it had not fared badly and that essentially non-alignment is freedom of action, which is part of independence. Well, that's a little interesting because I'm going to tell you right now, the way that that was stated to me, the way that God stated this to me, is that India is batting cat eyes at Israel. And if you look at their relationship, it's not really autonomous because India has received quite a bit of help and influence from Israel. So I don't believe that statement, I mean, it's good in theory, and I hear it, and I actually agree with it. By aligning ourselves with any one power, you surrender your opinion, give up the policy you would normally pursue because somebody else wants you to pursue another policy. And I think that biblical teaching actually supports that. You're supposed to be single-minded they're not saying this, but biblical teaching says you're supposed to be single-minded for God. You shouldn't be dependent on anybody. You're a nation that's supposed to be set apart. They're missing that, okay? But I will say that when you align yourself with something else, you're going to have to now negotiate. You're going to have to now compromise certain things about yourself. So you better make sure that the thing you're aligned with is in agreement with your core values, like a spouse or God. For famously allied Washington, non-alignment in the 20th century was a bridge too far. In 1956, then Secretary of State John Foster Dulles proclaimed that neutrality was an obsolete conception, immoral and short-sighted. It did not help matters that the United States had entered an alliance with India's arch rival, Pakistan, in 1954 and sided with the Pakistani military in the bloody civil war that gave birth to Bangladesh in 1971. Ooh, that is a huge point right there. Let me read it again. It did not help matters that the United States had entered an alliance with India's arch rival, Pakistan, in 1954. That's a key point right there. They are never going to trust the United States because India's relationship to Pakistan is similar to Israel's relationship to Palestine. And Israel supported India at this time while the United States turned their back and supported their enemy. That is a major, major issue right there. And I don't think India will ever forget that. It did not help matters that the United States had entered an alliance with India's arch rival, Pakistan, in 1954 and sided with the Pakistani military in the bloody civil war that gave birth to Bangladesh in 1971. Ooh boy, they are not going to forget that. Nor too, when Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi signed a Treaty of Peace, Friendship, and Cooperation with the USSR in 1971, definitely tilting India toward the Soviet Union, even as the United States had tilted toward Pakistan. Wow, I did not know this history. It's a big deal. Okay, so, technically, the United States shouldn't be trusting them any more than they should trust the United States. It's a mutual distrust. Especially since the end of the Cold War, Indian leaders have sought to improve ties with Washington, but not by curtailing India's independent approach to foreign policy. Former Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee proclaimed India and the United States natural allies in a landmark 1998 speech in New York. How? How did he do that? That doesn't sound like natural ally behavior. But, we all live in delusion now these days. Yet this was perhaps more a term of art, you think, than a call for an alliance, as it occurred against the backdrop of India's nuclear tests, underscoring New Delhi's willingness to upset global nuclear non-proliferation conventions, which it never joined. Indian Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, whose tenures at the helm greatly improved Indo-U.S. relations, pursued a civil nuclear agreement with Washington and ushered in new cooperation in high technology defense and clean energy. But his government too defended its principle of strategic autonomy as a red line for its foreign policy, even as it moved closer to Washington than ever in the past. Look, like one alliance is greater than the other, don't you think? You have this overarching cooperation in high technology defense and clean energy, but you chose our enemy. So clearly you don't have a military alliance with us. You don't have our back. And I'm not saying that the United States should have. I don't think that what India is doing to Pakistan is right. What I am saying is that had to have broken trust. And how are you going to recover from that if you aren't having a conversation? They're not having a conversation about it. But his government too defended its principle of strategic autonomy as a red line for its foreign policy, even as it moved closer to Washington than ever in the past. Defending the civil nuclear deal with Washington before Parliament in 2008, Singh twice asserted that our strategic autonomy will never be compromised. Well, there you go. Except where Israel is concerned, right? Israel provides arms to India. Israel has trained their military. How are you going to go and make that statement? Our strategic autonomy will never be compromised. I mean, when you have another nation training your military, they are your strategy. Military ideology is one of the most profound ways of building your agenda into the minds of those who are representing your country. So if you're allowing another nation to do that, how are you going to say that your strategic autonomy will never be compromised? That's a lie. In important ways, Prime Minister Modi represents a break with India's past, most notably in his emphasis on India's Hindu rather than syncretic and secular cultural heritage. But his approach to the United States remains consistent with the history of his country's foreign policy independence. Blah, blah, blah. That's what I have to say to that. You're not independent. You are not independent. You are batting eyes at Israel. You want to be just like them. Modi has deepened ties with the United States now across 3 U.S. presidents through increased partnership in defense, in advanced technology, and in energy, just to name a few, as well as through moments of high symbolism, like his 2015 Republic Day invitation to former President Barack Obama, the first time an American president joined this day, honoring India's constitution. Even so, Modi has leaned into the United States while leaning into many other partners around the world. The Modi government invokes a Sanskrit saying, "The world is one family." No, not unless you're of the world, my friend. To frame Indian diplomacy. This approach has been termed multi-alignment, a theory of seeking positive ties as far and as widely as possible without seeing contradictions in this approach. In practice, New Delhi has carefully managed its relationships with Saudi Arabia as well as Iran, with Israel as well as Palestinian territories, with the United States as well as Russia. India's G20 presidency this year encapsulates this orientation with its Sanskritic theme of one earth, one family, one future, and its twin effort to lead the forum for the world's 20 largest economies while self-consciously presenting itself as the voice of the global south. You know, this ideology keeps coming up, and I'm wondering about it, but let me just say it that way, because God hasn't told me anything about it, but it's something that I think that we want to earmark. One earth, one family, one future, universalism, and that's what India is all about, from what I what I have been reading. I keep coming across that mentality, that ideology. And part of the reason why I mention it is because there needs to be, if India is now batting eyes at Israel, they're oriented toward Israel. Counterfeit Christianity is oriented toward Israel. The false prophet of the United States is oriented toward Israel. And this is rising as a global power, and therefore would have the power to be able to say, we need to be on the same page. Then that could very well be the reason why God is drawing my attention to it. He hasn't confirmed it yet. So let me make that clear. He hasn't made it clear yet. But we should earmark it as we're considering with him the picture that he's putting together. With this history in mind, it's easier to perceive that momentum in the U.S.-India relationship does not necessarily imply a path to a formal alliance or mutual defense treaty. In the United States, the mental model for positive international cooperation defaults to seeing ally as the ultimate endpoint. For India, that suggests a curtailment of independence. Gosh, I gotta tell you, this feels a lot like the person who's like not ready for a relationship. But really what that means is they don't want a relationship with you because it has this relationship. It has this relationship with Israel. It's just not attracted to you. And with India, even as cooperation becomes more extensive than ever in the past, consequential differences remain. For many in Washington, the dramatic growth of coordination and joint activities under the Quad consultative group fills a growing need in light of China's rise. Yes, okay, so I've read this over and over that India is trying to surpass China. They need to do something before China rises. That's a big part of this. Encompassing subjects as far-flung as maritime security, infrastructure, climate and resilience, vaccines, technology standards, and higher education, all underlining Indian strategic convergence with the United States in the Indo-Pacific. So what does that mean? It probably means that it's going to push India to make certain decisions and possibly alliances in order to avoid the rise of China. Yet strategic convergence there does not mean everywhere. Russia's invasion of Ukraine and its year-long war has elicited a tepid tut-tut from New Delhi. I don't know what that means. A tepid tut-tut from New Delhi, while India has escalated its purchases of cheap Russian oil at a time Washington seeks to isolate Moscow. Okay, so it's a little provocative. On closer examination, this foreign policy independence and desire to define its own path, so prized by India, may offer lessons for U.S. foreign policy. The unipolar moment has passed. By the way, I've heard this question being posed to India. Like, why are you supporting Russia by buying their oil? And they're very defensive about this. I've watched their approach and actually kind of respected their approach of like, we're not going to be bullied by you. We'll make our own decisions. They're not having it when they're asked this question. The unipolar moment has passed. In its place, we have more actors with their own perspectives and a rising China with global ambitions and its own priorities, increasingly shaping the priorities of others. The array of special relationships and alliances nurtured by the United States over decades are still in place, but many of these are now inflected by divergences with Washington. Take Turkey or France or Egypt, Pakistan or Brazil. These U.S. allies do not always see their alliance relationship with Washington as barriers to taking decisions that contradict U.S. preferences. Indeed, President Emmanuel Macron, too, invokes strategic autonomy. It's here that India's ambivalence offers a lens onto the world Washington is likely to encounter on a growing scale. In this world of more diffused power, a world with more diverse actors taking more distinctive foreign policy steps, partnerships, and even alliances marked by substantial disagreements might be the new normal. In fact, managing ambivalence may be the central skill for American foreign policy in the years ahead. I mean, it definitely appears that these other nations are vying for the power that America has had. And whatever allegiance we have thought that these different countries have to us, whatever loyalty we've thought that they've had, it seems to be coming to a close, guys. The jig is up, the mask is off, and whatever respect we thought we had, they don't really respect us. And for good reason. Not only do they not respect us, they don't trust us. You know, any more than you trust a counterfeit Christian who keeps saying Christian, 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 and then you look at their behavior and you're like, yeah, not so much. You want all the respect of being this person of character, but you don't live that out. I see the way you cheat. I see the way that you make excuses for yourself. You know what I mean? The jig is up. So these are the things that God is bringing to my attention. Now, all that's left for you to do is go to God and discern it with Him. Are these things true? What might He be showing you? But this is the picture He's weaving together for me right now.